right, so first up, joining me is Maribel Lopez. Maribel is one of the industry's lead analysts on mobile, in the intersection of mobile and cloud. She leads her own firm, Lopez Research. So Maribel, thanks for joining us. Jeff, come on up. I think many of you know Jeff Kaplan from his many years here helping out SIA in the cloud events. One of the leaders, the CEO of Think Strategies.
No, you stay there. Stay. Because I think we're going to order the names.
Louis, you ready? Louis Nages is going to join us. He's the CEO and co-founder of RevEvolve, which stands for Revolution and Evolve. And Phil Wainwright, who hosted a panel for us earlier today, who's managing director of Prolific Ventures. Oh, great. Here he comes. All right. Perfect. Welcome. Yep, you're going to go here.
I'm here, right? Okay.
All right, so team, we're at the end of 2 days, all about the cloud. You guys are up here to help us kind of summarize a little bit of what we heard and maybe point to the future of where we're going. It's interesting that we are at, I think last week was the 20th anniversary of the kind of the public World Wide Web. It was also the 10th anniversary of iTunes, which was a revolutionary cloud model for music. So one of the things I want to do is start with each of you kind of maybe giving just one or two key things you think are the key points about cloud today, whether it's a key trend or a key observation you have from all your customer engagements, and use that as kind of the starting point to see how your opinions are and where you think the market is headed.
I'm going to give you another anniversary, which is because we had a few weeks ago I think it was the 20-year anniversary of the first mobile phone.
Okay.
And I think that one of the things that we need to do when we think about cloud is stop thinking about it from a technologist point of view and start worrying about how we implement it, and start thinking about it from a layman's point of view, which is the cloud. Oh, that's that thing that everything is connected with nowadays, because that's the key thing about all of this, all of these changes, and talking about mobile and social and big data. All of it is to do with the fact that we're all connected by this tremendous shared infrastructure that we call the cloud. And that's the perspective, I think, that you need to think about it in terms of strategy and trends. They're not thinking about it in the narrow sense of cloud computing technology, but in the wide sense of the opportunity and potential of being connected by this incredibly powerful shared infrastructure.
So you're already going right to the connection of cloud and mobile, and cloud is essentially the connection platform for everything we do.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, good. Louis, what about you? What would you say is one of the key things that's happening now in cloud or cloud and mobile?
Well, I think first I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen. We're just at the beginning of the wave. It's a big wave from the PC-centric world we have been for 20 years to the cloud-centric. Okay, so we have seen nothing yet. It's just starting. And one of the key points, I think, is that we have to understand that it's not only US, but international. The number of US internet users is about 11% of the world, so 90% of the people are outside of the world. And the cloud is going to be one of the most disruptive technology for emerging countries, because if they have a phone, a tablet, and some connection, as Phil said, then they are on the cloud.
Right.
And they get the same application, the same Salesforce, the same Google Apps at the same price than the US. So the impact on the global economy is going to be huge and very positive.
Okay, so your key thing would be the international opportunity and growth around cloud is where the action is, and it's in many ways skipping the landline and cloud and mobile together are the big opportunity. Yeah,
especially if you are, my company works in 10 countries, from Europe to the US to Africa.
Yep.
And if you are in Africa, you can buy an Android phone, or in India for $100. You get some 3G or Wi-Fi, and you are on the cloud. Right. And you don't have to buy servers, you don't have to implement data centers. They don't have electricity, for example. And if you want to install a data center in Ivory Coast, it's impossible because of the climate and the energy.
Yep.
So just connect, and you are on the cloud.
Okay.
So it's a big change.
So it's all about the cloud.
Everything is cloud.
All right, yeah, that was a good joke. Come on now. Maribel, what about you?
I see several things happening when I talk to enterprises. The first is we don't talk about cloud as cost savings anymore, which I think is a big, huge transformation. The second thing is we, instead of just talking about cloud for experimental applications and services and dev test, we're actually starting to talk about cloud for mission critical applications, which I think is a huge, powerful change. Both legacy applications and new world mission critical applications, I'd say. The third thing that's happening in cloud is it's not as much about the infrastructure, and it's more about what are the services that help you run clouds better, more effectively. So a maturing of what cloud is, I guess I would say.
Okay.
And lastly, I would say that we're now not talking about cloud as an island, we're talking about cloud as intersecting with other things, and I think that's really important. So cloud and mobile, cloud and SaaS, cloud and social, like cloud with everything.
Yeah.
Cloud plus something.
So cloud no longer just about cost, running mission critical apps, not so much about the infrastructure and connected to everything else. Is that a fair summary?
Yep.
Okay. Jeff, what about you?
I've always loved Maribel, and I'm going to build on what you just said. What I see
We love you
is
too, Jeff.
thank you very much. What I see is a shift in the questions from what and why to where, when, and how. And what I'm seeing increasingly is the customer actually being ahead of the vendor in many situations. They're finding out about what the cloud is or have an inkling about what the cloud is from their peers and from what they read. And they want to learn more, they want to do more, and they're being held back by two forces. One is the vendor may not be able to keep pace with their requirements, but then the second one is their organization may not know quite how to absorb these new service capabilities. And I think that's beginning to frustrate some CXOs who are becoming more and more enlightened and getting ahead of the learning curve and trying to figure out how they can use the cloud to be successful.
So to Maribel's point, they want to use it for more mission critical things, but it sounds like one of the adoption barriers you're seeing, is it cultural or is it more technology about how to absorb these new services?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the enabling technologies are certainly certainly maturing more quickly. But the ability of organizations to absorb them because of technology, because of skills issues, organizational issues, attitudinal issues, all of those become barriers or impediments, at least, to adoption.
Can I just pick up on that?
Please.
Because it reminds me of a conversation I had recently with Jason Averbook, who is the Chief Strategy Officer now with Aperio, the cloud integrator, and he joined Aperio when they acquired Knowledge Infusion, which is a business that has been helping enterprises put cloud applications like Cornerstone HR and Workday into their HR operations.
Right.
And it was quite an interesting conversation because he said that the SaaS industry does itself a disservice, really, by saying how easy it is to implement these applications. You know, it's on demand, you just start using it, and it's like everything else on the web. You don't need any training, you can get to go with it straight away. Well, actually, you know, to use something successfully in the enterprise in a purposeful way does actually require user training, change management, processes, and if you go around saying you don't need any of that, it's all easy if you're using SaaS, what you're doing then is you're setting the enterprise customer up for disappointment when they implement the applications. And actually, Aperio, Jason was saying to me, you know, the integrator ends up being the people who actually have to sit down with the customer and give them some hard truths about the fact, well, no, actually, you do need to look at your organization and how it operates so that you can take advantage of the new things you can do with these new applications. And you see this very frequently with the startup SaaS companies going into the enterprise market with this mantra that it's a consumer app, there's no problems with it.
Right.
They don't invest in the professional services and the customer success personnel to make sure that their enterprise customers get the most out of those apps.
So the whole on-demand concept maybe creates the cultural problem of this adoption.
Yeah.
And you know you're looking at the guy who created that for IBM, right? But anyway, aside from that, I think that's an interesting point, right? Which is the SaaS phenomenon, which is more the application layer, has been something where the user adoption maybe has been a little bit more difficult than we thought on the enterprise side.
Yeah.
Right.
The technology implementation, yes.
Yeah.
We got rid of that problem, but that creates a new problem, which is the process implementation effectively.
Right. So Louis, you spend a lot of time on this. I mean, you seeing the same thing, or would you argue that it's not that big a deal?
No, I'm 200% agree.
Okay.
Technology works.
Yeah.
Financial, it's okay, it's cheaper. That's solved. But then we get the cultural and the human issues. And I will take just one example. We work a lot with Google Apps. Today there are 1 billion users of a product some people may remember in the room. Office? You remember Microsoft Office?
Microsoft Office?
Yeah, you remember this old product. Okay. So there are 1 billion users. By 2020, there will be none. 0. Okay. And there would be
Wait,
on
we're
the
not doing
cloud.
predictions till the end of the show.
Yeah, okay, but that's obvious. We have 2 billion users of communication and collaboration on the cloud. Could be Google or Microsoft or whatever.
Okay.
But when you go to people and say, you have to stop using Word. Okay, no Outlook. No, how do you survive? So we spend 50% of our time just explaining and babysitting the users. And it's a very big challenge. The cost is obvious, $40, $50 per year, nothing.
Right.
But it's going to be a big, big change. So I have 1 billion potential customers. That's a nice market.
It's good, very good.
There's an issue here that we may not want to see coming, but if it's true that these companies find that it's too frustrating to move down this path because we've set high expectations that they can't necessarily fulfill in a reasonable time frame,
Right.
and we have the good fortune of the economy beginning to turn around, the incentive for most of the companies who have moved towards SaaS in the cloud has been the economic downturn. They need to reduce cost. If things start to get a little better, they start to say to themselves, you know what, we've got a system in place. We can now afford to maintain that lousy system, but that's not as mission critical to change it. There could be a little bit of a backlash that the industry faces.
Yeah, I've got a comment on that.
Go ahead.
Mirabelle sat up straight on that one.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Oh, yeah.
I knew that would prompt it.
So thank you for setting me up like that.
There you go.
Here's the reality of the matter, right? We already have mobile, we already have cloud. Almost every system we have is broken by those two things, right? 90% of the applications and services we run today are broken by the fact that we have mobile and cloud. Whether we like that or not, it's the same thing as moving from mainframes to PCs, right? It's that kind of broken. It's not just a little broken, it's really broken. So as a result of that, I mean, it's a great opportunity if you take it. If people sort of stick with their existing model and don't try to adapt what they have today, they will not be agile businesses. People will be able to go around them. So you could do it, and you might have the backlash, but then you're going to be the dinosaur company where it's hard for everything to be done. And your customers are either going to be unhappy about that, or your employees are going to be unhappy about that. So the real challenge is to figure out how do you embrace cloud and mobile in a way that still allows you to do business until you can create that new thing. And how do you bridge back to your legacy applications? We have examples of companies that have built little apps that just take one piece of data from a legacy app, and now people only want to do expense approvals on the mobile app, right? They don't want to go into the existing app anymore, right? It's just so much easier. So you can start to see like little bridges like that are what you need to find as a company, or else you're just going to be a dinosaur and die. I mean, nobody wants that.
So part of this is the trade-off between what's a new enterprise workload versus replacement of existing, right? And I think part of the cultural transformation on cloud adoption is, like we saw in the CRM space, a lot of the new adoption that was cloud-based was first-time implementation of enterprise-wide CRM. So I'm curious, from your customer projects that you all touch, how much of it is of current cloud adoption is net new workloads coming into an enterprise, could be mobile, could be CRM, versus the harder sell of replacement and then cultural transformation?
Yeah, but if I want to comment on Jeff, cost was one of the reasons, but it's no longer the main reason. Mobile and collaboration is more important. Okay. And people want, especially the new generation, want to be able to work on the tablet, the smartphone, whatever, and no ways you can do it without the cloud and mobile. So anywhere, anytime, any device is a big, big factor. And this will push even more. And for example, when we implement this kind of solution in a university, is a good example. Students, training, absolute zero. They know about it. Professors, a bit more difficult. And when you speak to the administrative people, it's a big mess because they don't know how to do it. So we are facing this kind of changes, but the pressure coming from the end users and the next generation is so big that we'll succeed.
Right.
I think something that you picked up on, you were talking about the cost of not wanting to do it. One of the big issues with cloud, not as it pertains to infrastructure, but as it pertains to software, is the software wasn't customizable, and that was part of the benefit and the cost savings of the cloud. It was like one standard software. And I see a lot of clients pushing back on, do I really want to use something that isn't customized? So if they did ERP, they customized that a lot. But is ERP the same as HR? Do you need the same amount of customization? And where do you deliver value? And I think there's this real struggle to figure out, as Joe Weinman mentioned earlier, where does cloud deliver value? Is it on the cost layer? Is it on differentiating? Is it on speed? What is it for you? And it's the same when you're building mobile apps, I think, as well. Yeah. Where's the value?
Well, and getting to your question, about how organizations are therefore adopting it. I do think it's hard, obviously, to generalize, but I see kind of a combination of forces here. One is a patchwork approach where they are layering on this new set of apps, and they're building those apps to accommodate some of these new demands. And then they're the enlightened, still few, but an increasing number of enlightened CXOs who are taking a cloud-first approach and saying, okay, wherever we do have to make a decision, let's start by looking at cloud alternatives and see where that takes us.
Well, I think that most of the cloud adoption is new stuff. In various contexts. It might be old applications, it might be ERP applications, but where you need to do new stuff. And what's interesting is that it's being driven by this pressure to be competitive. So that, for example, if you look at ERP vendors like NetSuite or Business by Design, they're very much talking about a two-tier ERP approach, where you don't take out the ERP from the head office, which is running everything, but you do put the ERP into your subsidiaries in the Far East, for example, because they actually need to run fast. So they need to have the applications that are up to date, that have got mobile, that can implement fast, that are easy, that are agile to adapt, and headquarters will catch up later on. So that what is happening is that it's like the mainframe never went away. People kept on using the mainframe for the stuff that it did. And now client-server, absolutely, client-server is the same thing, that it's still going to do the stuff that it always has done, the stuff that kind of just chugs along, and is not really, it doesn't have to move at the speed of light. But all of the, if you look now at all the exciting innovation that's happening in enterprise application software, it's in all of those bits of connection to customers, to mobile employees, to supply chains, that some of it we could never have dreamt of automating the things that we're now automating in software. Collaboration is another big factor. And so there's this whole new infrastructure of connected computing across the boundaries of the enterprise, as Bill McNee would probably say if he was here, and building the frictionless enterprise, which is my way of putting it, that is where cloud and SaaS is being adopted in really big ways now. And it's just going to grow around all of the old fusty stuff that no one wants to touch because no one remembers how to configure it anymore.
So that's interesting, because that wave, I think, in many ways happened, it continues to evolve, right? But it happened a couple years ago, particularly when enterprises were connecting cloud apps to enterprise on-prem apps, right? And Dell bought Boomi and IBM bought Cast Iron, and the industry kind of...
to connect all the new stuff to the old stuff that is still running important bits of your business. And yeah, we don't talk very much in the cloud industry about that big integration problem and the master data management problem and the process, the cross-application process management problem. Those are all issues that customers are grappling with, and the industry should be talking more about, rather than what features are there on the next generation iPhone.
Right. So play that forward now, and it feels like, Maribel, you talked to the point that more and more companies are integrating data sources and what's becoming known as the API economy, right? That increasingly they're trying to be agile and build that out. So How much do you see companies now thinking about the API model? I mean, Layer 7 got bought 2 weeks ago. IBM entered the space last week. It's kind of the next evolution, I think, of kind of a modular cloud, for lack of a better word. Maybe somebody can rename it here.
Well, what's interesting is the terminology is spreading beyond the boundaries of the software development team or the infrastructure team. I mean, just the whole, popularization of the term app, over the past couple of years. APIs beginning to gain the same kind of socialization, if you will, in terms of business people understanding the meaning of the term. I was at the Calidus Cloud user event earlier this week, and I was on a panel with a woman who is responsible for sales management for a big health services company. And she's talking about APIs. She's not an IT person. She's not a software development person. But she knows that the only way to get one thing to work with another thing, between the cloud and her reality of on-premise systems, is APIs. So I think people are recognizing that it is an important issue and a barrier if they're not designed properly.
And that's another trend, that the business people are now leading the buying, that the IT manager is the person, or the CIO is very often the person who is just buying the stuff that maintains the old stuff. And the new stuff is being bought by these tech literate business people. And that's why we're hearing that people like the CMO control a bigger budget than the CIO.
And I think that's more true than anywhere in mobile, right, Meryl?
Yeah, I think sometimes that we have the tendency to sprinkle like API pixie dust over things, right? It was SOA pixie dust, now it's API pixie dust, and APIs aren't that easy to build, maintain, implement. But the good news is that people like the CMO and line of business managers think about connecting things now, and I think that's a big trend. And there might be some evolution of what we're going to do with API platforms and the whole thing, but I think people are getting the notion of, business used to be discrete islands, and groups didn't talk to each other, and data didn't talk to each other. And now we're in a mode where I was just talking to MGM, and he's trying to figure out, how could I get the unified Maribel, know what you did at the Bellagio, know what you did at Mandalay Bay, know what restaurants you're at, the whole thing. Where does that live? And then how do I get that back out into my systems? Because right now there's not a field in the restaurant system that says Maribel likes lattes, right? And that's the kind of thing that people are thinking about. How do I collect it, but then how do I get it back out into other systems? And they can take it out of a system, but then putting it all in one place and then redisseminating the right information is a real big challenge. And I think some of that is APIs and some of that's just a different way of thinking about what we're doing with the data.
Yeah, if you think about it, the two parts of the same puzzle. One is a lot of folks have been trying to accelerate business processes and become more agile. And now they're adding on the weight of, we want to get more information out of those systems that are tethered together by that process management flow. And that's adding a certain level of urgency to this whole equation.
But this is good for IT, right? Because there's been all that discussion. We had the discussion earlier about how does IT matter, does cloud matter, does all this stuff matter? I think there's never been a time where people are more concerned with infrastructure than they are now. More people know more technical terms. They think things are possible, which is good news and bad news. Bad news, they want you to create everything in like a half a second. Good news, though, they have an understanding of this is the thing I want to create, and you're somehow important to me creating those things. So I think it's a nice partnership that's happening between IT and line of business now that wasn't happening before at all.
So this concept of kind of connecting mobile data, user data, system of engagement. Jeffrey Moore wrote the famous paper about system of engagement, right? And mobile's driving a lot of that, and the need to connect it back to systems of record. We've been talking about that as the connection of all that as the system of interaction, right? So let's transition a little more to mobile and cloud, because that's where a lot of that comes together. If we think about how mobile apps are driving, changing behavior in the enterprise and changing behavior of how app development is done, and therefore changing the nature of the cloud, how do you guys see that playing out in terms of the intersection of mobile and cloud?
There wouldn't be any mobile apps if there weren't the cloud. I mean, so that's a very basic thing, right? So I would go back to say, if you were there was all this excitement in mobile at the consumer market, and one of the things that allowed that to happen was people could build apps in the cloud. So they didn't have to buy the infrastructure, they could build the apps in the cloud. They could then test the apps in the cloud. Massive amounts of people, so to speak, hitting an app to see if it would crater or not before you actually rolled it out. Huge invention on consumer mobile apps that allowed us to get to where we are today. And now, if you're a business, you have the choice of, do I do a SaaS app or do I build my own app? Where do I test and run it? If you want to do collaboration, you can stand up instances to do collaboration. I mean, there would be no mobile apps without the cloud. It would have been unaffordable for people to get to the place we are today. I mean, we'd have them eventually, but it would have been like 5 years down the road from now.
Other perspectives,
Yeah,
Louis?
if you speak about the enterprise environment, I think the mobile, like we know it in consumer, will not be so successful because it's too complex to build for too many platforms. And so HTML5 and very reasonable applications are going to win. And if for a company, some of our customers build application in HTML5, so they run on any platform. And the value is bigger than the challenge of getting top of the line application. Good enough is a good way of looking at it. They do good enough application, and then they run on any platform and any device. Yeah. So I think this is going to be key. And the new version, WebRTC, is coming. Everything is coming to the web. And I think proprietary solutions like Apple Store, Android Store, over the next 5 years will be less important. And, like mail. You can, any browser get you on the mail.
Right.
And WebRTC, for example, for communication, will do the same. Why should I go Skype or Viber or WhatsApp if I can get everything on the web? So I think everything is going to be cloud web-based and universal. So any device, one more time, any device, any browser will do.
Can we just ask how many people are fed up with mobile apps? I really hate the way that when you go to a mobile, what is this all about? You've got to go into the app, then you want to go to another app, and you've got to, how do you get the information from one app to another? Why is it that you have to kind of come out and go to the, it used to be that you could, and why on earth Windows? I mean, why did Microsoft take a great idea like Windows, where you've got all these different windows open on the same screen, and get rid of it for Windows 8? I mean, what were they on? The web is a great interface for doing lots of different things and interacting between those things. And getting rid of it for the App Store model is probably the worst mistake. I feel like I'm back in 1995. No, when was Windows introduced? I mean, I'm back in the 80s, aren't I, when I'm using apps on a mobile device. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, but this is the first generation of this, right? So, I mean, we have to look at the evolution model. We've got the cloud, we've got the mobile. We're recreating the same mistake. Louis, you just brought up the whole thin client, thick client debate all over again. We've had all of these debates over and over again, and it keeps happening, and we skew more towards one. So, it's not going to be no native apps and just web apps. It's going to be both, and the mix will depend on what kind of company you are. It's not going to be just like 8,000 little applets on a screen because we won't have a screen big enough or we're too old to read the screen, right? So somehow they'll start to converge. But I think we're in the process of recreating, and we are exactly at 1.0. And the question is, we don't know what the next engagement model is going to look like. We're just still getting over the fact that we've got this new engagement.
Like Phil said, when I started working, I had email for some of my clients. I had an email on one of my clients. I had to change mail client to another one, and a third one, and a fourth one.
Yeah.
I'm fed up. Okay, and now we got everything to be running on the web, on the cloud, from any mobile device. And I think there is another key point. The number of platforms is exploding. Firefox OS is coming, Tizen is coming, Microsoft is trying to come back. BlackBerry is dead, but they don't know if they are dead. Okay, so all these platforms are fighting. Right. But you cannot have 10 platforms and 10 applications. It's impossible for the developers. So you will go web, and I think 90% of the application will be web-based. And this idea of good enough, I think, is key. I prefer a reasonable good application which works anywhere, any device, than something very fancy, which I have to change. I have my Android, and I have my Macintosh. Stop it.
I think, though, that what you're bringing up, and you started to bring it up with WebRTC, is that today's web is not tomorrow's web, right? Just the way today's mobile is not tomorrow's mobile.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't agree that we'd have 90% of the applications in web if I thought we were going to have the same web that we have today. So we're having a better web experience. I still think we'll have native apps because that's just the nature of the beast. I think the more important question is not whether or not it's web or native, it's around how do you design it so it doesn't have too many things? Because our old app paradigm was you put, now we have nothing in the app, and then, our current apps have everything in them. So how do you strike the right balance of getting the things that people need so that they're doing business better and more efficiently?
But it also gets back to the disruption within the enterprise or any organization where they're trying to absorb these new SaaS apps, whether they're mobile or not. But let's imagine this just within the four walls. But they also recognize they want to make them accessible via mobile devices. And the decision makers who are involved in that process are trying to change business processes, change systems and software integrations, and change the interface by which people access these apps all at the same time. These are the kinds of things that slow down that adoption process.
Yeah, it's not just a technical problem. You're right.
That's right.
It's the real business. Like, what's my new business process look like? That's the issue, right? It's not, whether or not I put it in Apple iOS or on the web or on devices or if it's cloudified. I mean, all that's important. But if you don't get the first part right, the rest of it doesn't matter really.
So I want to build on that because when we talk with customers about mobile, oftentimes we'll draw the analogy in our customer briefings about where mobile is relative to where the web and the cloud were. And it kind of goes like this. And I want to test it with you guys and see if you throw me off the stage. But the reality is when we looked at how the web evolved, right, the initial debate on the web was, is it going to be Netscape, AOL, or Internet Explorer? Who's going to win? How do I get my page views and my rankings up? Those are the metrics of success. And I kept redesigning pretty web pages. And that was all kind of Web 1.0, right? Jeff's agreeing so far. Okay.
Yep. I can go back to the PCs. We did the same thing 30 years ago.
Okay.
Which PC was going to win?
Same
Yours
thing
or
with
the
PCs.
Apple?
Yeah, exactly. And then Web 2.0 came along, and people realized it's actually not about any of that stuff, and it doesn't matter at all who wins the browser wars. What matters is how do I convert this to business and e-business and e-commerce? And to do that, really, to Maribel, to your point, was I got to reinvent my business process. I got to rethink how I line up my business, my resources, and then I can think about how do I create the right web experience for my clients, right? And I think mobile, my view would be mobile is in the same spot, which is we had the first wave of mobile, and by the way, it was all about iOS versus Android versus RIM or BlackBerry versus Windows Phone, and people still debate that. But we're just at the beginning of the second wave of mobile, which is how do I reinvent my apps to be about engaging experience for the client? Right. How do I retool my business processes? I don't just take my CRM system and put an M dot in front of it and throw it on a phone, right? You have to recreate all those processes. So agree, disagree that is that about the right analogy or yes?
Well, basically what you're talking about is you've got to scale the application to the use case in the environment and the end user device.
Yep.
And in some ways, we've been doing this for a long time. There's the data center mainframe version of the software, and then there's a client server version and the desktop version, and so on. We've added another layer. We've added another layer of confusion and I think complexity to the process as well.
Yeah, it's slightly more complicated, right? Because it's screen size and then it's touch and voice, and so it's a couple of different things that make it that way. And the question is, which environment, when you're building your processes, do you start to design for, and how do you get it so that it has that richness, which kind of gets back to you. Is it responsive web, or what's that look like? But it's responsive something, right? Whatever that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was talking to, sorry.
No, I agree, but you're also going something which is, I think, very important. We are entering the industrial age of IT, like the car industry.
The industrial age of IT.
Yeah, we were in the early age of car. You build your car on, each car was different. And now we are entering the industrial age where you have a solution which works in infrastructure or in application. And it works. IT works, it works. Okay, so that's new. And 90% of the IT industry is scared to death of this evolution because they were building products which were not working.
Right.
So we had to spend years to install an ERP which was never working, and when it worked, they change a version, and you take 2 more years to implement it. Okay, so that's finished. Okay, so all vendors are against these changes. The software house don't like it because there is no business. Okay? And some of the CIOs are very afraid because less servers, less money, less people, less power.
You're going for provocative, aren't you?
No, not at all.
CIOs are afraid, vendors don't like it, we're all in trouble.
No, but 90% of the industry is against what's going on because it's big change.
Yeah.
And the companies building carriage for horses were not very successful with cars.
Yeah.
So the new generation, like the Salesforce, the Google, the Amazon, are going to win.
So I want to segue off the car point though, because last week I had the privilege of having the CIO of Ford with me on stage, right? In a number of different things we did at one of our events. And we're talking now about the Internet of Things, right? Which is, many people say, might be the next evolution of cloud, right? And he's got a Ford Fusion he brought on stage that has 6 chips in it, 16 million lines of code, and is now going to feed back to Ford Motor Company. They haven't quite set the interval yet, but they could feed back every second 60 different data points, right? And get to a system of measurement and engagement on that car that opens up a whole new range of service possibilities, engineering possibilities, you name it, API possibilities. So is that where the internet is headed, Internet of Things and cloud? And how do you guys see that playing out with some of the clients you're talking to? Are they thinking about it like Ford is, or are a lot of them kind of just getting their arms around it?
They're all thinking about it. I think that the ideas become popularized, and they're all trying to figure out whether it's apparel or furniture, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They want to better track those items, those products, whatever their product happens to be, and not only to improve on inventory, all the traditional metrics, but to your point, to better understand the nature of the customer so they can better engage with that customer as well.
Well, and better track the life cycle of the product, and to be able to, I mean, if you look at a lot of equipment manufacturers, they're starting to instrument their equipment so that they can see how their customers are, whether it's John Deere with combine harvesters, or it's Union Pacific with railroad track sensors, or Philips with medical device imaging, MRI scanners. They're collecting the data, looking at the utilization, looking at the failure patterns, and working out how to develop these products better and how to help their customers get the most out of those products, the most utility.
Right.
So, I mean, it's, and so because of all this instrumentation and processing that we can do, and the software being so and storage and everything being so cheap, it really means that every product company can become a service company. And you don't just deliver a physical product, you deliver being able to farm more effectively.
And then you can take that one step further, which is John Davenport was talking in the Wall Street Journal recently about every company is not only becoming an information services company, but a data services company, because they understand the value of that data.
You were speaking of car, but on the plane, for example, we are working with some plane manufacturers, and one flight will come back with 1 terabyte of information per flight. So if a plane is flying 6 times a day, that's 6 terabytes times 365 days per plane.
Right.
Then that's an interesting volume of information that could be used for plenty of stuff. And I was reading today that somebody has a patent, crazy patent, for finding if you forget your kid in the car, you will be alerted on your phone.
Okay.
You know, it's crazy stuff. But it's
it
coming,
sounds pretty
you know,
good
it's
to me.
coming, okay.
Right.
Well, yeah, or you could just look around on the back seat before you get out.
Or on
There are
But
some
I
apps
think,
that
so it's interesting because as this is evolving, right? I mean, part of what's been holding Internet of Things back has been there's been no standard, right? The railroad companies use a different protocol than the building companies, than the electric companies. So what I think is also interesting about this is, you know, on the infrastructure point, cloud OpenStack has become kind of the de facto model, right? What's interesting about Internet of Things is 2 weeks ago, Oasis finally proposed a standard for Internet of Things, which is on MQTT, to finally get not just, you know, the big companies together, but hopefully all the manufacturers together, and Cisco and IBM and Red Hat, everybody lined up around that. So it's interesting if that'll be you guys think that'll be the inflection point for Internet of Things and kind of the connectivity, or do you think it's going to take something else?
Well, it's 2 things, right? It's what you talked about around the standards of things talking to each other, and then it's like anything else. It's like a critical mass of things that could be connected being out there, right? So it takes a while for the Ford Fusions to sell and get into the marketplace. It takes a while for you to have the smart chairs with the chips in them. But, you know, now we're getting to a point, it also takes people a while to understand what they could do with it. You know, I think it was 3 years ago, Mark Ralston from Frog was talking about instead of you going to computing as a destination, computing lives around you. And that's a pretty big change from a process and infrastructure and just how you think about the world. Like what could, you know, so right now we're talking about connecting things. We're not talking about like what that actually means, like what's the outcome of that. So I've got a connected car, that might be more obvious, but if I have the connected chair, you know, what comes out of that? You know, did somebody move the chair, or, you know, what can you tell me about that, right? So it's thinking how that changes the model, I think, is also
Changing
part of it.
the business opportunity around it.
What's the revenue? Like, why do I care that I've connected the Internet of Things, right? How does it make me do business better? And I think you can see it in a personal device like a car. I think sometimes in business it's harder to see it. Although Bill Rue from GE had a great discussion point on this. He talked about the airline industry and how difficult it was to change out planes. But if somehow I could take those terabytes of data and figure out how to make the pilots understand when to make the trade-offs between arriving on time and saving fuel and things like that, he thinks that there's between 5 and 10% efficiencies they could get on fuel. You know, and that's
by having more real-time indicators. Of
and that's billions of dollars around the industry, just in teaching you how to be more efficient alone without doing any infrastructure change at all, because they already have a certain amount of sensors on the plane. As they get more stuff on the plane, that gets better and better over time, right? And they can redesign planes and all those other things. But the short term, they can still be impactful. So it's figuring out what's that thing that's impactful, that's a quick hit that gets you started today, and then how do you change things over time with Internet of Things, that I think is also really powerful, in addition to just things being able to talk to each other.
Yeah, I think to be even more practical, I'm now working on a project for car manufacturing. They are obliged, if you go in developing countries, all the countries require the vendors to have some part of the production done locally, value added. And we are working on a project for one of the car manufacturers in the world where the full information system will be on the cloud native. So you can implement your factory in any country with the same system, all the application on the cloud, and you can move the factory from Venezuela to Algeria to Nigeria, and you have no application local. That's amazing. On efficiency, because all your production, your marketing, everything is built on the cloud, like your information system in the cloud, and you want to implement something in Venezuela, you can do it in weeks.
You're ready to go. Okay. So in our final couple minutes here, we get to transition to the prediction section of the hour. If you had to make one prediction about what's going to happen in cloud and mobile that we'll come back and talk about next year for this event, next 12 to 18 months, here's your chance to be famous. Who wants to go first? Anybody want to go first with their prediction?
I guess I would say that next year we're going to be talking about big data in the cloud. So, you know, and how do we do real-time decision making based on putting new big data sources in the cloud? Because now it's not necessarily thought of as a big data solving problem.
So you're not going out on a limb like one guy 2 years ago said there's no such thing as a private cloud. Just giving you a hard time. Yeah, that's good. All right, who wants to go next? So big data and real-time decision making. Big data and real-time decision making will be big in the next 12 to 18 months. Louis?
I think maybe we will be speaking about wearable computing. It could be the iWatch, Google Glass, and this is maybe the next generation of device which is coming. Yep. Nobody knows, but maybe it will be to next year we will our Google Glass on everyone here. I don't know. This is going to, because for the innovation on the phone is finished. You know, you don't do more. So you have to find new product. And I think wearable computing could be maybe not next year, but in the next two years.
So I'm going to note you for two. One was wearable computing next year, but you also said something else provocative, which is innovation in the phone is dead.
Physical, yes.
Yeah,
you know, you can do more. You cannot do a lot more.
All right.
They all look the same.
I agree with you on the physical innovation. It's becoming harder and harder to make that thing differentiated.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Oh, I don't know.
You can go down a different path with your prediction if you'd like.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I think that we will still not be spending enough time talking about the practical realities of implementing this stuff for businesses. We spend too much time talking about the next technology fad You know, I sat through 2 marketing channel sessions yesterday, and no one mentioned the word email in like 90 minutes. And so, you know, everyone still uses email in their marketing. Why don't we talk about it when we're talking about kind of how we do marketing? So, you know, there are all these kind of neglected areas that we never talk about that are still so important to people actually with real businesses in the real world.
So is your prediction email still relevant next year, or your prediction we're talking more about business value of these things?
We'll talk more about business value, including of email.
Jeff?
I may go back to my original point. I think that there's a very good likelihood still that this absorption issue is going to be a big one. And as a result, you know, the Gartner hype cycle could lead us into a little bit of a trough of disillusionment. However, I'm hoping that that could be outweighed by an explosion in the professional services world of new firms and additional expansion of the existing firms to try to offset that, to help the companies get guided through this process. And you know, the great thing about this world of the cloud, as I always say, is they'll need consultants, and thank God for that. I've got tuitions to pay. You know?
I have one more. I think in the next 18 months, we will see the beginnings of the next Google. And the beginnings of the next Google will be somebody that's built something that collects lots of data for one purpose and then decides that they can monetize that data as a data broker for a different purpose.
Data broker. Okay, that's a good one. Team, please join me in thanking our panelists for their very provocative discussion.